Alright, suppose you have like 20 to 25-ish kind of dollars and you're looking for something that's sort of like warm sounding but a little bit neutral leaning. Well, I have today that sound-ish. This is the Astrotec Vesna. Let's talk about it. Alright, as a disclaimer, this was sent out to me for review, but this won't affect my review in any way, shape, or form. Everything you're going to hear here is going to be my own personal opinion. Also, this is going to be more of a gaming review versus an audiophile review. While I will be touching on audiophile aspects, I'll be using those aspects and whatnot. I'll go through the whole audiophile range, but I'll explain how that'll affect its performance in games. And with that being said, let's get started.
Alright, here we have the Astrotec Vesna, as I've mentioned before, and if we open up the box, we're going to get the IMs themselves with the cable attached. It's the non-detachable cable version. We also get a carrying pouch which contains extra ear tips, as well as a USB-C to 3.5mm audio adapter. And of course, there's paperwork. Taking a closer look at the cable, while simple, it is very well built. I do like it. It has a pretty thickish kind of sleeving of rubber around it, and this keeps it from kinking when you straighten it out, so this is all real good to me. On one end, we have a 3.5mm jack, which is pretty simple and solid, so that's good. And at the middle, we have the splitter, which is very simple and clean, and feels pretty durable. And as you may notice, there is a chin slider, but it doesn't have the best grip, but it does its job just about okay. Like, it'll do. Moving up, I did buy the version with an inline microphone, but if you don't want it, you can save a little bit of money and get the one without the inline microphone. Now, for those of you who will be using this little inline mic, this little guy right here, this is how it's going to sound, and I'm actually pretty impressed by how it sounds. Inline mics have come a long way, honestly, and this is pretty decent for where it is. But let's see how it sounds if I'm typing, to see if it'll get the sound of my voice or the sound of the keyboard more. And, you know, it's going to get my voice a bit more, but in case you don't believe me, this is what it sounds like. So, that has been the microphone. Now, as I've mentioned before, as you can tell, the cable is not removable, but at least it feels relatively solid. If you do want, you can get the version with a removable cable, but it will cost you a bit more. Anyway, moving on to the body of the IM itself, we got a pretty nice all-metal build with this little plus-shaped symbol, which does bother me a bit because that plus is a little bit off-center, but that might just be on my set. Your set might be a little bit better. Anyway, at the top, you'll find out which side is left or right, so that's pretty useful. As for the nozzle, as you can tell, it's also made of metal, and you can see here there is a metal grill to keep your dirty earwax out. Now, for those with a sense of vanity, here's how they look like on my head, and as you can tell, with this bullet kind of style, they kind of stick out just a bit, but honestly, it's nothing too offending to the eyes. Comfort-wise, it's going to greatly depend on what ear tips you put on it, and I got the medium tips on right now, so they kind of stick out just a little bit. Now, while I typically use medium-sized ear tips, I found myself not liking them on the Vesnas very much, so eventually I switched to the smaller-sized ear tips so they would go deeper in my ears and sit a little bit better. So if you do get the Vesnas, I do recommend going down one ear tip size, but you know, your mileage will vary when it comes to comfort. Now, when it comes to the sound of these guys, like I've said before, it has sort of a warmish kind of sound with a little bit of a neutralish kind of lean, somewhere like in between that spectrum of sound. At the low end, we have a slightly boosted bass, but very slightly, just enough to give it some presence, but not enough to make it like overly powerful, so it doesn't really bleed into the mids because of this, which is a good thing. The bass is pretty decent, but how it feels will be kind of conflicting and depend on your taste, because the bass itself is more boomy than it is punchy. Its reach into the sub-bass regions is just kind of decent. The feel of the bass isn't the most impactful. It is there, but it has more of an oomph kind of feel versus a sharp punch. Overall, I want to say the bass is kind of like on the relaxed side, but it's not too relaxed where it's boring, because, you know, the oomph is still there and gives us a little bit of like excitement and presence, but not like a whole lot of it. So it's, you know, more for someone who wants something that's like not too fatiguing, that will still give them some impact and feelings of bass, but not like too much intensity of bass. So if you're like really into bass, you're like a bass head who loves bass cannon sounds, this ain't it, chief. Moving on to the mids, despite being a warm sound overall, I would say the mids aren't necessarily recessed. They feel almost kind of forward, but this might be due to the way the mids sound throughout its range. So like in the lower to the mid range of the mids, it seems slightly recessed, I'd say. It's a clean sound, but it's not a very detailed sound. I don't get a lot of detail retrieval from the mids until I go into the upper mids, where it sounds very clean and clear, and it's a really good amount of presence in that zone. And, you know, overall, this affects the overall sound of the mids, where it's hard to describe. They're not like super intense, but at the same time, it's not like super relaxed. Like, I'm not gonna say it's balanced, because there is a sense of intensity when we get more of those upper mid-range sounds, but if there's like a mix of the lower range, then it just kind of
makes it chill out a little bit. So we get like a little bit of forward intensity of the mids, but not a lot where I would actually say it's kind of intense, because it feels like there's a recession to the intensity. It's like it's being pushed forward but pulled back all at the same time. Anyway, moving on to the highs, I'd say it's pretty decent. It's not a bad like upper range. It's got a pretty good reach into those higher sounds, and it does roll off at the top. There are times though where it gets a little bit harsh, but I didn't experience too much of it, luckily. So there are, you know, a few times it will get sibilant when it gets those really high sounds, or when those sounds are really pushed forward when whatever you're listening to. Overall, I think that the sound it's clean, and the clarity is just okay. It lacks a little bit of detail, kind of like the mids, and I'm not sure if it's being affected by the mids or the bass when those are happening at the same time, but I do think there could be just a little bit more detail and sparkle in the sound. Overall, like the rest of it, it's kind of like relaxed but intense at the same time. It's how do I describe this? Neutral but not. like I said, warm-ish but neutral leaning. Now when it comes to the soundstage, and I guess we'll get into gaming at this point, I was surprised at how round the soundstage was. While, you know, there is more space from their sides versus the front and back for the more ovular shape, I was surprised that these are closer to a circle shape than like most other IEMs at this price range. It has a pretty round soundstage despite being like a closed back, you know, IEM. Overall, I'd say the soundstage is pretty well shaped. The size of it's pretty decent. I think it's a little bit bigger than average, so overall size of it for an IEM is pretty good, especially considering the fact that these are like just a little bit more than 20 bucks. Now when it comes to the imaging, it plays well with the soundstage, and I would say that the Vesna really utilized the soundstage pretty well. It's not like, you know, mega pinpoint accurate, but I would say it's still got pretty above average accuracy in terms of like its precision for its imaging. And the sound separation was also pretty decent as well, so like, you know, in the midst of a crazy battle, you will be able to kind of like separate the sounds of it. But what I should note about its usage in this situation, in, you know, in tandem with like its sound signature, is that it's not the most intense sound. So when it comes to like more competitive shooters, you are going to be working a little bit harder in your head and with your ears to try to listen for the sounds that you'd normally be tracking for, like, you know, footsteps and gunshots and whatnot, because the presence of the sounds we'd be tracking for isn't necessarily very forward. It is clear and it is there, but it's not like brought to your attention by the sound of the earbuds themselves very much. You actually have to kind of really focus in and home in on those sounds. So when you hear them, it feels good, it is accurate, but it's not like alerting you of the presence of these sounds. It doesn't pull out these sounds and present them to you on a silver platter. You have to actively look for them. But if you're not trying to do that, and you just want the ability to, like, you know, zone off when you want to and listen in when you want to, so, you know, you can like play more competitively when you feel like it and less competitively when you feel like it, then it's not so bad. But I do think if you're more like into those really competitive situations and you want that advantage where the presence of those sounds comes straight at you, these aren't exactly going to do that. These give you the choice of whether you want to or not. Now on the other hand, if you're playing these in a less competitive setting and in more like atmospheric sort of games, or just, you know, competitive games in a non-competitive manner, these things do a great job simply because of how they present the sound very well and in a relaxed manner where it's not very fatiguing. You can wear these for hours and listen and have a pretty good experience of the world and the game. Like, if you're not taking these games too seriously for like competitive value, I'd say that the Vesna does a really good job just because it's a very easygoing, enjoyable sound. Like, I found myself picking these things up to play a lot of the games because, one, well, they're very comfortable to wear, and two, the sound itself is very comfortable without like sacrificing too much. It's not a very intense sound, but at the same time it's not like super relaxed at the same time. So it's got a good middle ground where you're not too intensive in the sound, so it gives you some fatigue of just listening to sounds coming at you, but it's not so relaxed that it's boring that you wouldn't want to pick them up. If you only got like $20 to $25-ish, then yeah, you know, this is a pretty good pick. If you got more, yeah, there's other picks, but if you're broke, these aren't bad. I do want to compare them with like those Moondrops that just recently came out that are also in that $20 range, but Critical made a really good review about them, and that caused a lot of people to buy them. So now I gotta wait till like June or July to get my set. But, you know, until then, for, you know, like the $20-ish range, the Vesna is pretty damn good. Anyway, that's pretty much all I got for these guys. So if you do want to buy them, I'll have a link in the description, just, you know, to purchase from. And, you know, if this video did help you out, do leave me a like. Helps this channel exist. Subscribe for more content. Hit the notification bell if you want to know when I'm posting next. I also stream every now and then. A little link down there so you can watch me die in games. But, you know, that all aside, that's it, guys. So hopefully things go well and this helped you out. So see you guys next time.